it seems like we keep having these same conversations over and over again, and we need to move beyond them. And I think education in the classroom and conversation about these issues will really help. So I guess I would say cautiously optimistic, as long as that we're well trained and doing it well, because as we know, every time there's a movement forward, there's a backlash. That we passed our ethnic studies class PASO 2 years ago, and right after that, they passed an anti-critical race theory resolution, and they, so there's these still these fears and tensions out there that we need to move beyond. That's my initial reaction.
As a student who went to a predominantly Black school, I didn't realize the education I was getting until I left and went to a predominantly white school. You don't realize that the teachers around you are actually teaching what the other students aren't learning. And I think that's where the ethnic studies here in California, the requirement is actually going to be beneficial to us, because I took for granted being taught Black History Month every single month, being taught about Black authors and that kind of stuff in high school and middle school, elementary school, being Coretta Scott King for how many musicals. I mean, I didn't realize the importance of it until I actually got to an all-white school and realized no one else in the world does this except for me, or except for my school. As a professional who had to seek out this diverse curriculum in college and even implement my own, and as I was teaching, adding to the curriculum, I think it's going to be beneficial for all students, because even if a student doesn't realize they're missing anything, even about themselves, like finding a deeper understanding about yourself, thinking you know what your culture, what your ethnicity does, is only a small portion of it, because your ethnicity is only what your parents have taught you or what you saw in your family. It may be much bigger than that. And even taking courses through Cuesta, I've learned so much more about my own ethnicity. And I think as a person, even from an ethnic background, you have so much more to learn about yourself as well as other cultures. And it enlightens me every time I find something new and explore something new and do something more exciting, to explore my understanding and keep learning. So I think to implement this at an early age in high school will be so beneficial for our students to be able to walk into the world and be able to interact with other people and not walk in with the prejudice that they think they know about a culture.
I come into this with a very similar, like cautiously optimistic about this, because I think it goes back to what Mr. Land was saying, that absolutely it's 100% needed. It's needed even prior to high school, honestly, because we know that at such a young age, the socialization that happens and the conversations and the way in which we begin to think about certain things happens a lot younger than when we're in high school. So I would love to see it kind of implemented across K-12, but we're met up with the challenge of who's teaching this. Are they doing it justice? Are they teaching it correctly? What does this look like? And I'm fortunate to be in a position right now where I'm immersing myself in work, specifically in, ethnic studies and teacher education. And I'm coming to the realization that this requirement is coming a lot sooner than my students will be out in the teaching workforce. So we had to come up with a kind of quick, okay, we're not just addressing the undergraduate students that are going to be teachers, but how are we also actively supporting educators that are in the classroom right now that we have access to? And it's been kind of disheartening to see that some districts are like, yeah, we're going to offer it, but we'll figure it out, and not really providing their educators, their teachers with proper training. Ethnic studies work, it requires a lot of time and effort and love. And I would like for it to be seen like that across California, rather than, okay, we just have this requirement, what are we going to band-aid over it to just fulfill it? But it's not really being, properly done like we know it should be done, right? Because I think it really begins with more than just a 1 hour workshop or seminar that you do, right? So I'm thrilled that it is now a requirement. I feel like this just ignited the passion for a lot of my students that want to be educators to say, I can now go and teach ethnic studies, and I cannot wait for them to be the educators that we all needed and deserve when we were in the classroom. But again, the twofold, right? Where I urge districts and in California to put more emphasis on well, what is this actually going to look like?
Thank you so much. I liked hearing what you all had to say because you're right. The more we learn about ourselves and the more we learn about others, it's just really, it can be really impactful. And then of course, the more we learn about others, it helps to reduce stereotypes, it helps to reduce bias, and it just helps us all to function in a healthier way with one another. So I'm also glad for this requirement too. Thank you. My next question is, how did you begin to teach ethnic studies at your current school? And anyone can jump in. Yes.
I think ethnic studies as the discipline, academic discipline of ethnic studies, it's more recent, but I think in terms of many of the principles of trying to peel away the dominant narratives of America. I'm a history teacher and a government teacher, and so much of the way we've taught history, and it's been required in the curriculum, has been from a very narrow framework that excludes foreign perspectives and, marginalized perspectives and indigenous perspectives. And so I've always been interested in trying to peel back layers of that dominant narrative and bring in voices that have been excluded or erased or marginalized. And that's very much what ethnic studies does so well. More recently, we had a series of events in Paso that made it clear that we needed to do more than just discipline students or write letters home to parents or pretend that we didn't have a problem. And so a committee was formed to look at diversity and inclusion issues. They recommended a lot of things: training for teachers, training for students. Those still haven't happened, but they did recommend an ethnic studies class, and came to me just because I think I seem to be someone who was sympathetic and had incorporated some of those ideas into my classes, but very very hesitantly did I even consider it, because being a white male, teaching ethnic studies is one of the goals of ethnic studies is to get away from the white male gaze. And so it was a really nice experiment for me to try to find out the reasons why I needed to and should teach the class. It needed to happen. It needed to happen at our school. And luckily, students and teachers and community members and Cuesta and Cal Poly all came together and helped advocate for this course. And so I happen to be the teacher. I'm happy to pass the baton on next year to Deb, but the way it happened was I was asked by the community to teach the class, and in my imperfect ally identity, I could not say no. There's a lot of mistakes I've made, but I was not going to make this one, and it needed to happen. And so I've done the best I can to teach the course, ever aware that of the irony of the fact that it might not have been approved by our school district if a white male hadn't been the one proposing it, and still it's still problematic that a white male continues to teach it. So it's a humorous, ironic experience for me, but very also deeply meaningful, because it has been transformative, and I can talk about that more. But this has been one of the most rewarding experiences of mine. Thank you. Yeah, it is transformative, and it is changing, and we're seeing this. One of the students from last year's class was a panelist in this morning's sessions. It's already happening. The change is happening. So I guess I've fallen backwards into it, but I've found loving arms.
Thank you.
I haven't officially started teaching ethnic studies in high school, but I think just like Lan, as a history teacher, you sort of look at the perspective in which the book or the material that you're given is presented, and you realize there is another voice there. There's another perspective that's not being voiced. And so I often tell my students, I go down that rabbit hole of YouTube and find the videos and find other information and just start fact checking people and information that I get, see if this is like really credible. And so, especially during COVID, I realized I was diving into a deeper hole of finding the truth out, not just taking for granted what was given to me. And so I think even before that, before I knew what ethnic studies was, I was already manipulating curriculum, adding things to things just to make sure everyone understood the whole ramification of Manning at McGee and understanding what that looked like for actually sixth graders. And so I think I've been doing it for a while just because of what I was taught as a high schooler. But I think I'm excited to get into it next year, to bring some of the things that I've learned from the courses that I've taken as an educator to deepen my understanding of ethnic studies, but also from the students. Our students at Paso High are amazing students, and they always want to learn more, and they're always trying to challenge us as teachers, but also the society. And they want to know deeper about things that not necessarily they see every day. And so I'm excited to engage with those students and see how deep we can go into ethnic studies.
So I like to think of myself as a lifelong learner and teacher of ethnic studies, because I feel like as a product of Mexican immigrants, as the only one born in the U.S. out of my siblings, like there's a long kind of historical influence of how like I navigate my day to day. And I always say that my parents were my first students. My mom till this day is the most challenging student I've ever had. But I always like to think of my immersion into, or like me being an ethnic studies educator really has been through like my pedagogy and like the practices that I take on a day to day rather than just in the curriculum. So I worked at a high school for many years through the AVID program. And growing, I was teaching where I grew up, which is in Santa Ana in Orange County, which I like to call the real Orange County. And yes, thank you. And it's a Title I school, is very low resource. Been in working through the AVID program. If you're not familiar, it's supposed to be this kind of college prep program for students. And for me, it was really trying to do my best to make them know that they matter, that they will continue to matter wherever they go institutional wise, because we know living in a bubble, you leave that bubble once you leave to go to college, and it's really difficult for a student of color. So just kind of, embedding in them that they deserve to be in these spaces just as much as their counterparts who didn't have to struggle to get to these spaces. So, but specifically in ethnic studies content, I began my work in 2013 when I started my PhD in Chicana and Chicano studies at UCSB. Because I had teaching experience, I was asked to teach as a teaching assistant for the department. And I started, we have all the classes that we teach at UCSB, but I always like to think that, I continue to learn. I'm continuing to learn this work every single day, and I'll continue to learn until the day that I'm no longer here, right? Because I always open my spaces to, I'm not just here to be your instructor and your professor and to teach you this, right? But I'm here to learn from you and your lived experiences as well. So I think if we're thinking about like, how do we even begin to think about being an ethnic studies educator, like how do we begin to bring this work in? I think it really begins with like, how can I open up this space for narratives that have been removed, right? How can I give my students a space where they feel like who they are and what they bring into this space, their whole selves actually matters in this space. And I think now more than ever, our students need that more with our constant attacks on, queer and trans people. So really, they don't leave who they are at the door, right? They're just how we don't leave who we are at the door. Like whatever I come into that day, what I'm going to teach, everything comes in there with me. Even if it is like, hey, I was listening to, Bad Bunny on the way here, like my students resonate with that. So I think really kind of deconstructing this like hierarchy of like how we see and teach our students, that is even us beginning to immerse ourselves into how we think about being an ethnic studies educator.
Thank you so much. You all made so many good points. I was writing notes. No, go ahead. Be yourself. In thinking of what you were saying, Jeffrey, about you know, taking your identity into account. I think we all, when we're teaching classes related to race and ethnicity and just talking about culture, always taking our ethnicity or just our different social identities really into account is super important. So I appreciate you even acknowledging that and talking about that. And then I was thinking of a point that you made, Deborah, when you were talking about modifying the curriculum. I feel that I'm constantly doing that myself, you know, just thinking of how do I bring in diverse voices, right, in the classroom? How do I make sure that my students feel heard, they feel seen? And there's so many different ways to do that, and thinking of what you were saying too with inclusivity, right? All of that is a part of just being really mindful as an educator and making sure that students are being exposed to a lot of different voices and marginalized experiences and voices. So I appreciate all of those points. Okay, so I have another question. All right, what challenges arise, or what challenges do you encounter in an ethnic studies classroom or when you're teaching about different cultural groups, and how do you typically respond?
It is a really tough question.
is.
I think for me, some challenges I reflect on my learning, my teaching every year. Every semester I stop and I reflect back, like what could I have done better? One of the biggest challenges I realize is that there's times I have to get out of my own comfort zone and teaching things. In particular, it comes to mind last year. I'm a weird teacher. I don't believe in finals. And so we always do projects. We always do projects at the end of the year, sort of like, what did I miss in history that you really want to dive deeper into? What can you research more on this one topic, whatever? And I realized last year I didn't talk about Cesar Chavez as much as I should have, because 3/4 of the presentations were on Cesar Chavez. And I realized, okay, next year I need to start adding a unit on like a couple of days on Cesar Chavez, dive a little bit deeper into this, because obviously my population wants something more out of what my curriculum is providing. I think that also the topic is being in a one of the only 2 Black teachers at Paso Robles. We often get to a point of when you start talking about very sensitive topics, you have to get beyond your own feelings and be still willing to authentically talk about the topic, and be aware that because they're high school students, sometimes they want to take words that you say in context of history and they want to run with it. And you have to be able to school your own emotions and be able to say, okay, let's talk about why you said that and how it's affecting people around you. And so I think that's the biggest challenge in teaching any subject, is being able to go, I may not be comfortable with this, but maybe we should keep teaching it because this is why I'm not comfortable with it, because no one's ever talked to me about it. And so being able to grow within your own teaching to understand that the topics you talk about that are required for you to talk about maybe something that you're not comfortable with, but you still have to go through it. And if you don't know, rely on your colleagues to help you understand it better and be able to teach it better.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that. I think honesty is a big part of the challenge in ethnic studies, and including your full story. And while you ask students to include their full story and their full selves, some of the things that we run into on a daily basis in my ethnic studies class, which is wonderful, we try to understand how to look at the way stories have been told. And we realize that there's not just one story that's been told out there. Students are getting information from their families and from their feeds and their friends. And so we're first just sort of deconstructing that sort of narrative, and then realizing the boxes that we've put things in terms of trying to label different kinds of Latino Americans or different kinds of African American experiences or contributions to culture or Asian American hate. What does that mean? We find ourselves trying to categorize, and then how do you get out of that trap of the boxes when we are talking about very specific groups of people and their experiences, and so there's a lot of traps that are easy to fall in. But I think ultimately the biggest challenge I run into is connecting the understanding, this new understanding of history and ourselves and America's story, with activism, with like actually changing the way we live our lives and the way we connect to our communities and the way we stand up to intolerance or forms of institutionalized racism. And that's my biggest challenge, is when we can, how I can, reach into students and find that connection to the theme and the topic, and then realize the need for change, that we're not done just talking about this and understanding it. We have to really somehow bring this out into the community. And that's why, a celebratory drag show at lunch is part of that inclusivity and celebration and joy that we need to have. But it's also, what do we do when we're being assaulted and when we're being restricted from teaching things, or trying to, in our case, maybe put in an LGBTQ section of the library and the community says it should be burned. What do you do then? And that's when I'm challenged, when I really need students to step up and put all this conversation we're having into change, into real meaningful change, institutional change that will make a difference for the future. That's my biggest challenge, but that's also the power of ethnic studies. And I've seen it happen, but for me, it's always a challenge.
I think for me, it's like two parts to it. Like, so challenging, like on the ground with my students, it's really breaking them away from traditional forms of learning and showing me that they're doing this learning. So by the time we get to college, you are really good at taking tests. Some of us more than others, because it's really about like, what can I memorize and regurgitate back to a test on a piece of paper and I'm done, right? So for me, I don't do quizzes. I don't do tests, finals, what, right? Like that's not, to me, it's like, that's not showing me that you're learning or like engaging the content that we're giving you in this space at all. So for me, it's like really having them kind of learn how to be critical, actually be critical, and not just like how you're filling out and understanding this question, but like creating something different. Giving them the opportunity to be creative is like, what? Like I have an education mapping assignment that I just gave my class literally this week. And I was like, have fun with it. Some of y'all are like super good with like your little iPads and making like images and all the things, like add color to your life. And, we haven't been given the opportunity since we were maybe kids for some of us. So for that's like a challenge that they're like, Dr. Z, what, really? And I'm like, yeah, really. Right. And it produces some of the most amazing work that we can produce, right? Because we are now including multi kind of layers of like talent and knowledge that we have into what we're producing in an academic setting. That's the easy, cool one for me to deal with, right? Like that's a challenge, but I can deal with that. The hardest one, obviously, is the larger kind of backlash against ethnic studies. On like the school level, right? Like we have parents, administrators who just don't get it. On a larger scale, right? People just continuing to push back. And the thing we always hear is, ethnic studies is getting conflated with critical race theory, and they are not the same thing. They rely on each other to some extent, but they are not the same thing. So I think now that ethnic studies is being like accepted in some ways, they're now finding a way to remove it or like challenge it through their challenge on CRT. And I always think of it as, they say ethnic studies is anti-white and it's divisive and it's doing more harm than it's doing good and it's indoctrinating. When in reality, the indoctrination is happening by you explicitly removing those narratives and that content from us to begin with. So that is the actual indoctrination that's happening. It is not happening through ethnic studies, but it's the removal and explicit, not inclusion of it.
Thank you so much. And I like how you all are talking about like honesty, right? And how ethnic studies is really about that. Let's have honest conversations about what has happened in our society and different communities. Let's just have conversations about it. So like you said, having open conversations, honest conversations, authentic conversations, I think are always extremely helpful. So I appreciate everything that you said, and also helping students to understand activism, right? And what that looks like. And there's a variety of different ways to be activists, right? To use your voice, to participate in creating change. And so I know that's always important, something I work with my students on as well. So I have another question. Just two more questions. What are some common misconceptions about ethnic studies, and how do you address these misconceptions? Yeah, you've touched.
I touched on that a little bit, so I'll kind of, I guess, add to it. So misconceptions is that it's anti-white, it's divisive, it's causing more harm than good. And I think, the best way to kind of address this is to to engage these folks in conversation. Like, well, what is your understanding really? Like, what is ethnic studies and to you? And really, sometimes it's difficult because we're like, oh, here we go again. Like, I have to explain to these people like why this is important, but it's sometimes giving, that time to really explain like what this actually is. And this is when numbers matter, right? There is actual research out there. These, institutions and things like this really care about numbers and what is the data telling us about this. And there's a good amount of research already out there showing the real good that is coming out of having ethnic studies as part of curriculum for our students. And not just students of color, but white students, like the impact that it is having on white students. It's there. So I think presenting them with like actual facts sometimes aside, because sometimes they're like, well, it's just you, that's how you feel and it's your narrative. And of course you want this or that. But when you can really get into it and be like, look, go and read these few things that show like actual tangible data, then that's how you can kind of fight sometimes this very hard but necessary fight is really by presenting like the honesty and like the authenticity of like work like this does. So
Yeah, I could build on that too. I totally agree with what Dr. Sarate said, and the idea that there's a fear, and this came out when we were trying to get our class approved, that it was going to try to teach all white kids at the high school should feel guilty for the crimes of white America, and that it was going, by focusing on ethnic or racial identity, it was going to be more divisive than unifying, and that it was going to teach kids to hate America. And so I think the proper response that that I've seen work at the high school level is when we can have they come in and see the conversations we have. We all have an uncomfortable and complicated relationship with this country and how we fit into it, and it makes it in many ways more meaningful when we can acknowledge the great parts of our country, the fact that ethnic studies was started in the United States for good reason, but also the fact that we need to have these conversations about our past because we keep ignoring the truths of systemic racism. And so I think having those conversations is good. And then, for example, at our school, we have a majority Latino population, but the teachers and the administration are majority white. And so students have recognized that they want and need to see themselves in their teachers, in their school, in their curriculum. And they began, they developed a program. They analyzed the English language, the reading requirements for the high school, for example, and found out that out of 23 required books, only 2 books are by authors of color. Only 2 required books. They were both by Black authors, one Chinua Achebe, Nigerian, and one Zora Neale Hurston, Eyes Watching God. So they went and said, well, how is it that in a Latino majority school, we have no Latino authors? And they went to the English department and made a presentation and said, this is a form of systemic, marginalization, if not racism. You're not including us in the curriculum. We want, and the English department has responded, and English department is rewriting their text requirements and making it much more diverse. So we can see that it's good. It leads to positive change. They said no one wants to go to the dances because it's all the same kind of music we don't dance to. So they planned their own baile, and we've had 2 bailes in the middle of school. Everybody, all students, not just Spanish-speaking students, came and it's a huge success. So when you can show representation leads to, inclusivity and joy and students who feel like this is their school, I think it works. So I think small steps, but it comes through that conversation, that uncomfortable conversation, um, and keeping your eyes on the prize. Because there are people that are going to be fighting and resisting, and having the argument with them, having the conversation with them, but then still moving towards our goal of a more inclusive curriculum and community.
I don't know how to add to that. I think for me, the misconceptions is that it is we're hating on the majority and the book publishers. And for me, it's more like I'm celebrating a group that hasn't been celebrated before. And so I think yes, we need to know why we're not celebrated. So we have to go back. And as I say in my history class, we have to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. The United States is built on not just, the founding fathers, but the founding fathers had backgrounds and they were men, and they had to look at perspectives. And so I think that when I look at the misconceptions of ethnic studies is the fact that we look at it as we're only looking at the bad stuff. For me, I'm also celebrating some good things that happened that we just never knew about and never were taught about because it was just eliminated from our history books. So that's when I see the misconception.
Yeah, the most popular section of the ethnic studies class that has been going on at the school is the section after looking at the difficult histories and the marginalizations and oppressions and racist laws, and then saying, okay, what are the contributions? What are the signs of resilience? And we look at everything from bomba dance and to step, and we analyze rap lyrics, and we look at where the mambo came from, and students are like, this is so cool. This is the celebration of the stuff that hasn't been celebrated. So yes, it's looking at the difficult past, but it's also celebrating that resilience.
Yes, I love that. Looking at the difficult past and also looking or celebrating, right? Different communities. And so, yeah, I do the same thing too in my classes and the events that I hold on my campus. And you're right, students really gravitate to these celebrations of different communities. So yeah, I like that. Okay, so my last question is, how would you respond to parents and or community members who are concerned about students taking ethnic studies courses? And you've already touched on this a bit, but I would love it if you could elaborate on any of the points that you brought up.
For me, just like Lan, we had a discussion when we were trying to push it through the board, the ethnic studies class. It was easier to push it through it than if I pushed it through it, just for, obvious reasons. But I would say something like, I've been in this district for 15 years. I'm doing it without a course name on it. I'm doing it, and your child has never come back to you and said that I've ever bashed anybody. I would say that learning something new is never easy, but it's always enlightening. So even though it may come back and you have to actually have a conversation with your child about something that you may not be comfortable with, it doesn't mean they're not learning something more about themselves, and you're learning something more about yourself. And so I would say that just because, this is one of our big things in Paso, is change is always hard. Change is always very, very slow, but change is always good. Change shows growth. And I think that's what we need from our students. We need to get beyond our traditional ways and look at how can we grow as a community to start accepting everyone into our community.
I think I don't have to work directly with parents, which in a way is kind of great. But I think in all aspects, I do work closely with a district. And, they have a large, very strong ethnic studies department. They have an actual department at their district. They hired an amazing person from the Bay Area who was doing work for years up there to come and be, the director of this ethnic studies department at the district. But I think more than anything, it's allowing the students to voice what impact this is making on them. they can hear from us day in and day out, and they're like, yeah, okay, y'all think you know more than we do. These are our kids, blah, blah, blah. But if they hear it from the youth, like if we amplify their voices and their experiences of like what they're getting out of this course, this content, like having access to this finally for some of them, I think that will be more beneficial than us just being talking heads over and over, spitting data at them or telling them like how great it is. I think really like engaging our students and our youth to, in a sense, speak back to some of this backlash, I think is going to be a way that can be really beneficial for how we think about answering some of these, misconceptions about it, what folks think it's doing to them, and what in reality it's offering so much more. So I think if we find ways to provide our students and our youth the space to share what it's doing for them or what it has been doing for them, I think that'll be really beneficial.
Yeah, I want to echo what you both said. I couldn't say it better. Yeah, trust the students, trust the curriculum. It brings out uncomfortable conversations, but we come together and we're better as a community and better as a school and better as a country. As a result, it's never easy, but we have to have these conversations to move forward. And yeah, I've taught for 2 years and never had a parent, of this class or other classes complain about anything. If anything, it's like, I thank you for bringing this really uncomfortable conversation home. We had a really great conversation about it. I'm amazed. Usually they don't realize how much their children, our students, want to figure this out. They really want to figure out where they fit in this narrative of American history, and this class, this discipline helps all of us do that.
Absolutely. What you just said, Jeffrey, made me think of when I was working with a lot of high school students at one point, and they had so many questions, about each other. And this was a diverse group of students I was working with at one point, and so we started having these uncomfortable conversations, if you will, or just talking about the communities that all the students were coming from. But I found it to be really enlightening. And Deborah, you mentioned enlightening. And I know the students found it to be really enlightening as well. And so you're right, in educational spaces, our students are wanting this information, I find. And so you're right. I think that if we can amplify students' voices and we're framing any misconceptions, or I guess framing what we're doing as being a way to enlighten students, I think that's really helpful. So I appreciate everything that you all have said today. So what I'd like to do now is open the floor for questions and answers. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? Yes. Oh.
I have 2 questions. Should I stand up? um, Hi, I'm a high school teacher, English teacher, and theater as well. And I started my well, I grew up in the Central Valley in California, like Manteca, Tracy, which is really diverse, but it's really conservative, which I find also is more conservative areas tend to be more resistant to things like ethnic studies. I went to LA, started my career there, came back to Central Valley, and was really like disheartened to come into an environment that was so resistant to things like ethnic studies and talking about injustices in the educational system. And then my daughter started kindergarten this year. And so having grown up in a system that didn't work for me, and now watching my daughter grow up in a system where she has had challenges, as I'm fighting the battle myself as a teacher, trying to be a voice for students, and now as a parent, I find that my nervous system is triggered a lot. And I'm already like a sensitive person with trauma, and I cry a lot. But I also know like speech and debate, the field of speech and debate, right? People who cry lose. And so I'm just wondering, Do you guys ever feel triggered in the field doing this work? And how do you regulate your nervous system? How do you deal with those moments when you're dialoguing with administrators or parents or your friends and colleagues who just do not understand or don't want to understand the work that we're doing? And then my second question is also if you have any recommendations as far as like curriculum or novels or textbooks for people who are interested in developing an ethnic studies course or curriculum, that would be a good like cornerstone for building the course.
Great question.
Okay, I'm excited about this question. So I, as a African American, grew up in an African American suburb to move to a predominantly white communities as an adult. I realized there's a lot of things, even growing up in an African American community, I didn't know about myself. And I truly believe Google's following me, and I'm listening to books on the car. And I don't know how I came across this book, and I'd be happy to share it with you as an Audible book. And I was in the car crying, like bawling, going up to Stockton on 5. And I couldn't realize why, but the book, which was a child book, because my students were challenging me to find more books that were in like African Americans and colorism and all that information I was learning. And it triggered me because I did the things that this girl was torturing herself in the book. And I didn't know that I was doing it until I heard it from someone else. For me, it was normal. And to hear from something else was like, wait, this is not normal. This is not what's supposed to happen. So I would say when those traumatic things happen, first, I do believe in therapy. So you can go talk to a therapist, but I would say you have to embrace it. I realized as I got older that crying isn't a weakness, and I'm a good person. And a couple of students that you saw me hanging around earlier today, we've talked about this in depth. As a I don't know, as a person who grew up in my family, crying wasn't necessary. Crying was showing weakness. You cried by yourself. Now I've learned that even if I'm crying by myself, I need to cry. And I never cry in front of my students because I do work with high schoolers and they will use it against me. But I do, there's times in which they walk out and I'll have an adult come in and I'll cry with the adult. Or I allow myself to cry. I allow myself to have those feelings because those feelings are exactly what you need. You need to have those feelings. You can't bottle them up. And I know a lot of cultures make us bottle them up and just sort of deal with them in silence. And that silence isn't good because you just keep carrying that baggage around with you. So the trauma that you're feeling is trauma that you've never dealt with, and you need to deal with it before you can move on and try to teach someone else how to deal with the trauma, because it's going to trigger kids. I've had multiple kids come up to me, even in high school, crying out of other history classes because they saw a picture and someone called them a monkey or whatever the case may be. And I had to get her through that trauma, even though I'm dealing with the same trauma that I'm seeing a student that's not even my blood, but she's hurting in front of me. And now I feel that hurt too, because that's the person I am. I carry on everyone else's feelings and emotions with me. And so I would say you have to be able to handle your own trauma and be able to have that so you can help someone else get through the trauma as well. What was your other question? Your question was about curriculum. I literally have stumbled across like tons of books. I've had students who brought books to me. I love literature. I don't teach English anymore because I didn't want to teach essays anymore. But I have tons of books that I'm an avid reader, and if I come across one, I'd be happy to share with you. But I have tons of books that I've been reading just to be more aware of other cultures. And I think, you can't get everything from a book or a movie or whatever, but I think just to expose yourself to other cultures and seeing how other cultures and just putting yourself out there and meeting new people and having that conversation. Sometimes it hurts because you're vulnerable and you don't want to show that vulnerability, but that's usually when that good conversations usually happen.
I'll share real quick. I cry in class out of compassion and joy. I have never cried ever out of sadness or triggered trauma. And I think hearing you speak, maybe it might be because this might be like one of those little examples of white male privilege, kind of way how it manifests. I've never felt the need. Is in terms of people who don't support the class, support the agenda, support the lessons. We have any number in the community and on our staff, and we have those conversations. But then we find our allies. We find the the BSU advisor to my activists. We find the MECHA advisor, and we get the students together and we plan awesome events, and we move forward in joy and unity and solidarity, knowing we're doing this important work. So that action overcomes the frustration for me. In terms of curriculum, when I was researching the class that I now teach, came across an amazing appendix to the state's ethnic studies adoption. I don't know if you've come across it. If you look on the state website for the ethnic studies adoption from a couple of years ago, there's an appendix of all the 120 or so registered courses in the state of California, literature courses, Chicano studies, African American literature, ethnic studies, from San Diego all the way up to Northern California, and you can look through how they approach it thematically, chronologically, and you can choose your own what you think would work for your students. So I recommend the appendix to the California State Ethnic Studies Adoption as an amazing resource.
Ethnic studies work and just teaching in general is so hard. Like it is so exhausting and just draining on our bodies, our minds, and all of that, I thank you for being an educator and like now wanting to fight that fight for your daughter. I'm a big old Chillona. Like my students are like, what's your zodiac sign? I'm like, I'm a Cancer. They're like, yep, that explains everything, right? I'm like, I'm an emotional person. But I feel like the work that is necessary isn't easy. Right. And I think now you're kind of going into this where you're now as an adult realizing like the structural inequalities and barriers that you face that now maybe your child is going to have to go through as well. But that hopefully will only, as daunting and exhausting as it is, I think it also kind of ignites a fire in you to say like, I'm not letting them go through the same shit that I went through. And I think the biggest part in like pushing through some of this is community. Like finding folks, like putting yourself into spaces like this where you have folks who are doing the work, wanting to do the work, that are like down to kind of get in there with you, I think is the best way to keep ourselves alive in some of this really, really difficult work that we do. So finding community and just finding folks who are gonna, even if they don't understand in the moment, like just as long as they're willing to understand, I think is a big part as well. And in terms of resources or like, how do I begin to do this? I would like to plug our Éxito program. So we have our second annual Summer Institute coming up the end of June. It is a 5-day long institute where you're not only getting lectures and discussions from some of the faculty on our campus, but you also have a built-in like curriculum development portion. If any of you are interested, please find me after and I'll give you my card and access to like where to go and register for that event. It is open to all educators. You don't have to be high school teachers. And that's another really great, like for me, it was, oh my gosh, putting on a 5-day event. What the heck am I thinking? But like just seeing the community that the teachers built with each other was 100% worth me like stressing over like what am I going to do with this event. So even in those instances, right, where you have teachers from neighboring, we had a teacher come from Minneapolis to our institute last year, right, and she now continues to connect with teachers that she met through this institute. So I think for all of you, if you're wondering like where do I kind of go or what do I do, like look for conferences, events, or things that are going to continue to foster that for you and just put you in a space where you leave and you feel like I'm ready, like, you're kind of ignited again to continue fighting this fight.
The Summer Institute sounds amazing. So definitely come and speak with her. Okay, I saw another hand. The mic is coming to you.
My question is, it's kind of two-part. If in an ideal world, like where you have all the budget, all the resources, everything available to you as an educator of ethnic studies, and you know that this requirement is coming to schools, what would be the resources that would be available to teachers or to the schools to make sure that ethnic studies is implemented appropriately? And if after you dream big of what you could do in this ideal world with unlimited resources, what would you recommend to be the bare minimum as we go into that implementation?
I'm a traveler, and so I would say if I had unlimited resources, I would incorporate travel with every single unit that we have to go visit indigenous places, ethnic places that actually have a true culture there and not my representation off of the internet or whatever materials I could have gotten. I take students across the world every summer, and so it's really cool to see their lives open up by getting out of our small bubble that is Paso Robles. And so I would say if I had unlimited budget, we would be traveling. We would have a private jet and we'd just be going everywhere. But I don't have unlimited budget. I would say the bare minimum, if you don't have the support from your district, the bare minimum is take what you have and add to it. There's sometimes that you're swimming upstream, and for you to wait for everything to fall in place, it may never happen. And so you have to get that action happening. There's so much information on the internet, so much information that even if you just had a structure from the state adoption and just go with it from there and adding information, talking to people, I think even if you reach out to the community, there's people in the community that really want to support what you're doing and come and be speakers. We've had tons of great speakers that came to Paso Robles that even enlightened me, not realizing yet, and not even realizing like what their impact was going to be from me. So I think it's, if you had bare minimum, it would be like, take what you have and just add as much you possibly can to it every year. It's not going to be the best first year. It's going to keep adding to it. But unlimited budgets, we will be traveling. We'll find languages. We'll find food and culture. And so I think that will be my uptake of ethnic studies. Right now, I'm just fighting to get to conferences. So
Yeah, I totally agree. Chicano Park, Mission District, reservations, Oakland, I want to just go to these places and meet people, meet community members, and just I would be traveling all the time for sure. I think if we can't bring students to the world, then bring the world to the students. So we have guest speaker programs like yours. We have linkages to Cal Poly and Cuesta. Wherever you are, you find your community college or local university, and you go to those conferences and turn students on to the amazing classes at undergraduate level. Yeah, so I think local connections and trying to have as many activities and visits and guest speakers and conferences as possible, get them out of the classroom, and doing projects, doing hands-on things and learning from people that are actually engaged. But don't be tempting us with budgets, with unlimited budgets, because it's dangerous. But it's a good question.
I think in adding to, their fun travel plans and a private jet, of course, we wouldn't want that. I'm going back to like the real need that of like giving it importance, right? Like this actually matters. It is another discipline alongside your math, alongside your English, alongside, whatever else it is that you learn. So I think giving it the importance, but I think on top of that is really paying teachers what they deserve for the work they are doing. You are already, you're already incredibly overworked. You're incredibly tired, overburdened. So like having to add another thing to you, sometimes it's like, I don't have the time to, on my spare time, we don't even have spare time, read and find out what ethnic studies is, right? So in my perfect world, we would have the money to pay y'all enough to teach smaller classes, give you a livable wage wherever it is that you live, and just really give this the importance it does, like giving you proper trainings from folks who actually know what they're doing, like what kind of ways to like fully engage your students and give them not just the content, but the pedagogical like implications in that classroom. Like, what does that mean? Travel, of course, let's take them all over the place, right? Like there's such rich benefit in like going to somewhere that has like such a like a big historical like implications like Chicano Park and stuff like that. But I think moving away sometimes from that too, and just like sometimes asking for like the bare minimum is like, to them it's like we're asking for a lot, right? So my bare minimum right now is like, I know California gave districts money for them to implement towards ethnic studies. So if you're not going to provide them with proper PDs at their site, send them off to conferences, send them off to institutes, send them off to places where if you don't have the time, capacity, or knowledge to do so yourself, outsource it. It's there, right? Well, you have to find that one that's good though, because
Right.
people are like jumping on this now too and be like, oh, we do ethnic studies now too. And it's like, no, it's not just about like bringing your food to the table and we're all sharing like chow mein, pozole and pasta, right? Like it's so much more than that. So I think like finding it for you should be the bare minimum if they're not going to offer it for you.
These are all really great suggestions. Yeah. Absolutely. Do we have any other questions? Oh, there's more questions.
Yes, we do have a question on Zoom that I wanted to
Yes.
pose and then we'll get back. So Stacey asked, do you think in the future there will be beginner ethnic studies class levels for those who have never been exposed and a higher level one for those who have breathed and lived it their entire lives?
Our school, there is a two-tiered system like that being planned. Maybe a freshman course, a semester course that fulfills, any of you don't know, the state has a requirement by 2029, all students will have to be, to graduate from high school, will have to have at least a semester of some kind of cultural competency, ethnic studies type class. It could be folded into an existing English class. It could be folded into a history class. It could be a standalone honors course, year-long. It could be a semester course that goes after the freshman health class. So there's a wide range, and there's a lot of room for differences, let's say. But I think a lot of schools are going to go that direction. Ours is looking at maybe having a semester class for all students, an introduction class that may be thematic, that kind of deals with some of these concepts. And then a year-long, much more detailed class that really can dig into it. I think that's where we're going. I don't know how the state will go, though. I think each state, each school is going to have to take its own journey, hopefully with good training from Cal Poly and UCS, the trainers, and so that we know what we're doing.
To add, we have been on a committee all year long about what our ethnic studies program is going to look like in Paso High. And my biggest concern when we have this introductory courses is who's teaching it. We have a lot of teachers, not saying that they're not good teachers, but we have a lot of teachers who just take courses that make sure they have a full schedule and not necessarily because they have a passion for it. And I don't want it, and this is one of my biggest pet peeves, I don't want to just give it to anybody and then not do it right. And then it go away. I want it, if it's going to be done, and it need to be done right. And so that's our biggest concern. But yes, we are trying really hard to do an introductory level. Freshman may be hard, but an introductory level and then a higher level like honors club.
I know Santa Barbara Unified, they've been offering ethnic studies courses for some time now, but I know within the last couple of years, and it is because, again, the community fought for more like a kind of bigger support for ethnic studies. So they created the ethnic studies department, they brought the new hire in, all the things. And I know they are teaching English 9 ethnic studies. So every single freshman taking an English course, it is English 9 ethnic studies. They're learning about intersectionality as 9th graders. Like, where was this when I was 14, 15 years old, learning about intersectionality? And like their process of like putting it into how they're understanding it is creating children's books and then going and reading it to the elementary schools. So it's happening, but I get where, it is difficult sometimes with the capacity of like who's teaching it, who can teach it, to offer a wide variety of introduction courses to then more specific. Like I know Santa Barbara, everyone is now taking it English 9, but there's also electives in like Chicano Lit and Black and Brown activism and like different types of courses that they offer because they now have an entire team of teachers being supported to do this work. So that's really important, I think, is if you're thinking about like what can I like ask for if I'm trying to like do some of this, it's really asking like for others to be able to support you, because like the work that you two are doing is so amazing, but I feel like it's not that many of you doing this work. So, right. So I think in if you're thinking about like, how do I begin to like, how can we start something like this? It's like really finding folks that are going to help you, because you as an individual, it's exhausting. And then you're also doing it on your downtime after work when we have a life, you have families, you have other things to take care of. Right. So I think that, again, going back to the bare minimum, right? I think that's another thing that we can think about. And then think about, okay, how do we offer intro and then advanced and stuff like that prior to you getting into college, because we know very well that we need this way before we get into the university setting.
Right.
If you even choose to take ethnic studies courses, right? So there's that whole thing too.
I agree with you about hiring more teachers, more educators who do this work, because when you do have a team of people engaged in this really critical work, you can support one another. It's just so much more helpful. Yeah. Okay, I saw your hand up.
I'm so thankful for these educators who up here who I have gotten to work with and gotten to know. I'm Brianna Ronan. I'm at the School of Education at Cal Poly, and I have some students who are joining virtually, and I have two questions. One is on their part. Many of them are teaching elementary education, and as we know, there is no ethnic studies requirement or expectation for elementary school level children, but they want to do this work. And so I'm curious if you all have some advice, suggestions for elementary teachers about how they might begin to have conversations with very young children around ethnic studies. And then the second question is on behalf of someone who trains teachers and my colleagues who train teachers. What do you think would be the best support that a school of education or credentialing program can provide to teachers who are currently, on the battle lines trying to get ethnic studies rolling in their districts? How can we support you all as teachers in that effort?
Thank you.
Hello. The first question was elementary. I have an elementary, middle school, bachelor's degree in education, and I would say the best. I only did the 1 year in elementary. I can't do this running noses, but the best thing I would say is literature. There's so much literature out there, and it's gotten bigger and bigger. You have to seek it out, but there's so much literature out there, and I feel like kids are more observant than high school and middle schoolers, just because they already have a sort of preconceived what they think is right in the world. Kids are still adaptable to elementary, still like moldable into understanding new concepts. So I would say reach out for more literature, novels, that kind of stuff that you're going to be teaching. Even when you do science, find out, like, if you're doing an experiment, what does that look like, as who started this experiment? Just give a little bit more background about where it came from. I know elementary, you sort of dabble in everything. You have to be a master in everything. And so it'd be nice to just, or even, I love bulletin boards and decorating the hallways. And I think that's another way you can sort of bring that culture and different groups into it and start having those conversations, just embracing their environment with it. And then the other one was, thank you. How do you support? I think if they came to us as like student teachers with, and I know some are not going to be receptive, but just willing to show us what you're learning. Because I'm a teacher who always goes back and takes more classes. I feel like I never start learning as an educator. I do know some of our colleagues never go back to school though, and never want to get more PDs and information. So I think if you have a student teacher coming out who's willing to embrace that lesson as soon as they get those reins, be able to start incorporating some of those things into their lessons, I think it will start opening up some closed minds that are already in the education system.
I was going to say the same thing for little ones. Literature, I think, is one of the easier ways for us to kind of begin incorporating some of this. But I think too, in thinking about like how we are engaging them in like fulfilling the standards is huge, right? But there's a way to play with the standards where you're still fulfilling them, but yet you're not having them follow like these arbitrary ways of like showing you that they're like achieving them, right? So I think in thinking about, like, again, it's the pedagogy. Like, what is the classroom like community look like? Do they see themselves as having ownership to what they're learning in this space? All of that is ethnic studies, right? Like just giving them a sense of ownership and a sense of like belonging in that space with little ones, and having some of these like they understand way more than we give them credit for, by the way. These little ones are on it. So not being shy to like not name things like race, because I feel like having these conversations early on only makes for them being better human beings later on. So not being scared that they're too young, they're not understanding, or it's going to make them, all these crazy things that you sometimes hear, right? just being honest. I think we've talked about it a lot on this panel. It's like just being honest and having these conversations. Like don't shy away from it with little ones. And ways in which teacher ed can support current teachers. I think, and this is not speaking to just your program, but across, like, I think teacher ed programs need to adopt ethnic studies frameworks. It is much more than one multicultural class that you take that sometimes talks about race, sometimes talks about white privilege, but not really, 'cause it's scary. But really adopting like some of this into our, like what we're teaching our teachers. That's a struggle that I find now, right? Where I'm training undergrads to go into TEP programs. So I'm like, oh crap, like you have an ethnic studies training, but you might not be going to a program that has like a good emphasis on it. So I think specifically in California as TEP programs, we need to get with it. Like this is happening. This is what our teachers need to do. Let's not be afraid to change our curriculum, right? And adapt to something that is more culturally sustaining, authentic, rather than it just being kind of, whoop, and we're done, right? So there's a lot of work to be done, but I have full faith, right? That there needs to be a better connection between our teacher ed and education departments and our ethnic studies departments, because that was something that I found missing through my entire career was like, why do I live over here? But then education, ethnic, like it just, why, like, why isn't there a better relationship there? So I think, and even thinking about that, starting a speaker series, like if we're not, if we don't feel comfortable speaking to this research, or we have like amazing faculty on our campus, bring them to our spaces and engage our, future teachers into these conversations that are supposed to be had.
Yeah, I totally agree. On the elementary school, I think that you've heard that literature is good. I agree. As far as training the next generation of teachers in integrated ethnic studies approaches is required. So yes, I combine them all together, and the next teachers need to be fully prepared to be leaders and also help train the teachers that in the schools they go to. But as far as existing teachers who might be there for another 10, 15, 20 years or more, I really think that having relationships between educational institutions like Cal Poly and UC Santa Barbara are really critical. Developing trusting relationships where there can be visits and teams and mentoring and regular workshops that build changes in the instructional styles. That's going to be required, because just one training, one professional development, one summer workshop, they're needed, yes, but they're not enough.
Thank you so much. And I absolutely agree with everything you all have been saying throughout this entire session. And even thinking about teacher education programs, I agree with what the panelists have said. Just having a really strong social justice focus and framework, and making sure that the prospective teachers, right, that you're working with, they are really learning about inclusive pedagogies. What does it mean to make sure that students feel this sense of belonging in the classroom, right? How can they feel seen? How can they feel heard? How can they learn about other communities? And it takes a lot of work, but I think the panelists have given lots of great suggestions on what can be done. I know that the graduate school of education that I went to, there were so many different programs, and we have a very strong teacher education program as well. But I remember there was just this huge social justice focus, like across all of the different divisions and programs. And so we were taught to be, loud, to speak up. We were taught to be accomplices, to be activists, to be advocates. And so I think when programs really do that and have a commitment to that, it definitely helps to change the game when people are walking into the classroom. So yeah, great suggestions. And so we're going to end there. Thank you everyone so much. This was a really great session, and I appreciate you all coming out, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to our host today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harven, for your moderation, and our panelists for sharing all of the knowledge and wisdom that you carry from your years as educators and in the current work that you do in ethnic studies. I first want to invite our Zoom folks that if there are any folks that access the interpretation to please to our Zoom poll that will be showing on your screen shortly. I'll also put in the chat for you so that you're able to do that. We also have a short evaluation that will be showing on the screen as well. So on Zoomland, there is your link for the eval. If you're here in person, there is a tiny URL on your program as well as a QR code that says tinyurl.com/CCES Teach and Eval 2023. Okay, cool. And moving on then, we have to thank our sponsors. So thank you again to for our collaborators and our sponsors, especially Diversity Coalition of San Luis Obispo County, for your generous support, your partnership. They are our community partner this year. We also partnered with Planned Parenthood California Central Coast, Cuesta College Ethnic Studies Department, the Office of Instruction, Applied Behavioral Sciences Division, Equity and Student Success Committee, Student Life, the Cultural Center, Cuesta Pride, and the Associated Students of Cuesta College, the Cuesta College Foundation, as well. The lunch was provided by the LGBTQ funds from the Office of Student Support Services and Programs. Yes. And so I'm going to pass it over to Seb to do our wheel of names.
Okay, yes. So for folks who registered, we are giving away 5 gift cards, $25 gift cards. So a little Wheel of Fortune moment. Oh wait, how do I do this? Okay, I'm just gonna click and see who our first winner is. Lizette Gonzalez. All right, we'll go number 2. And our second winner is Morgan Orgeron, student. Oh, Morgan's here.
Congrats, Morgan.
All right, all right. Number 3, let's see. Who is our third winner? Dustin Gill, congratulations, Dustin. We've got 2 more. Let's see. Who are our lucky winners? Yashvi Panchal, congratulations, Yashvi. And our final winner for the day. Let's see. Anna Miller, congratulations, Anna. All right, and we also just want to remind folks, you all made history today. This is the 2nd annual teach-in at Cuesta College, but it's the first year that you have 2 full-time ethnic studies instructors, myself and Dr. Mario Espinosa Kulek. It's also historic because it's the first time there has ever been a drag performance at Cuesta College. Yeah. And, I just want to say the teach-ins are part of a longer civil rights history. This is a practice that comes out of the civil rights movements of the 1960s, the anti-war movements, the environmental rights movements. And so we're trying, like bringing it here to Cuesta, keeping that tradition alive as a space to bridge students, faculty, staff, administrators, and the community, right? Kind of blurring the lines of who's allowed in these spaces and making it accessible for everyone. So you made history. You should be proud of yourselves for that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also remind everybody we made history at Cuesta with the first ever drag show during lunch. So that was a lot in part because of our collaboration with the Cal Poly Drag Show. So we're so grateful for them and are excited to be doing this work as your ethnic studies faculty at Cuesta College. Like our panelists said, this is really difficult work, especially for just us two holding a whole department down without a department chair, not in a division, doing this work and making it, as the best we can with what we have. And with the support of the community, we definitely wouldn't be here today. Please do stay in touch with us. Our Instagram is Cuesta Ethnic Studies. You can see here on the slide, once I change it down to the right.
Go follow us, tag us if you took photos.
Yeah, post your pictures, tag us at Cuesta Ethnic Studies. You can email us and keep the conversation going there, or at ethnicstudies@cuesta.edu. Definitely take our classes. In the summer, we're teaching Introduction to Ethnic Studies for those who are looking for something that's a little bit short term and wanted to get to know what ethnic studies is. And then in the fall and in the spring, we teach ethnic studies for educators. So if you're an educator looking for some PD and want to get some knowledge on pedagogies related to ethnic studies, Dr. Ferrara and myself teach that class and are looking and willing and able to teach that class and inspire future educators in ethnic studies. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
That's a wrap.